I'm standing beside my mother's casket, hands shaking, grief still raw like an open wound, when my wife Valerie leans close and whispers the words that will haunt me forever. "I'm leaving you, Michael. Today. I can't do this anymore." She says it calmly, like she's announcing a dinner reservation change, not the destruction of our 15-year marriage. My chest locks up. The air feels thick. I turn to look at her, and she's staring straight ahead, completely composed while I'm drowning in disbelief. The funeral home is packed with friends, family, co-workers who came to honor my mother's memory. Father Rodriguez is reading from Psalms, his voice echoing through the chapel. And my wife just chose this moment, this sacred moment, to deliver the killing blow. I open my mouth to respond, and the words that come out stop everything. The room goes silent after my reply. Guests freeze mid-prayer. Father Rodriguez stops mid-sentence. The silence that follows is louder than any screaming could ever be. I sit in the front pew afterward, numb, staring at flowers I can't remember choosing. White lilies, my mother's favorite, though everything feels colorless now. My hands rest in my lap, and I realize they've stopped shaking. The shock has settled into something deeper, something that feels like the bottom of a well. My name is Michael Knox. I'm 38 years old, a high school history teacher, and I just buried my mother after watching her fight cancer for 18 months. She was my anchor, my constant, the woman who called me every morning just to check in. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 7, and we became each other's whole world. Valerie used to say our bond was beautiful. She stopped saying that about 6 months ago. Today, in front of everyone who loved my mother, I lost 2 lives. The woman who gave birth to me, and the woman who promised to love me until death do us part. Except Valerie couldn't even wait for the burial. I notice the stares now, the way conversations stop when I pass. Aunt Carmen touches my shoulder gently, her eyes full of questions she won't ask. My cousin James keeps glancing between me and where Valerie stands by the back wall, already detached from our family group. She's checking her phone, scrolling through messages like she's at a coffee shop instead of my mother's funeral. Uncle Fred whispers something to his wife, and they both look at me with that expression people get when they witness a car accident. Everyone saw something break in that moment, the way my face changed when she whispered those words. The way the whole room felt the shift in energy, like a storm front moving in fast. Mrs. Patterson from next door keeps dabbing her eyes, and I know she's crying for more than my mother's death. She's crying for me, for what she just witnessed. Valerie wanted witnesses to this moment. She could have told me at home, in private, with dignity, but she chose here now, with everyone watching. She wanted people to see her walk away from me when I was at my lowest. 6 months ago, people envied our marriage. Valerie and I were the couple everyone pointed to as goals. We met in college, both ambitious, both driven. She became a successful marketing executive, while I found my passion teaching teenagers about history. We looked progressive, modern, unbreakable. We traveled together, hosted dinner parties, posted photos that made other couples jealous. Relationship goals, friends would comment on our pictures. Valerie was beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who commanded attention when she walked into a room. I was proud to be with her, proud that she chose me. We bought our house 3 years ago, a charming 2-story in Maple Heights with a garden my mother helped us plant. Valerie would brag about our communication skills, how we never went to bed angry, how we made decisions as a team. We were supposed to grow old together, supposed to take care of each other through everything life threw at us. From the outside, we had it all figured out. But people only see the surface, the carefully curated image. They never saw the cracks forming underneath, the slow erosion that started when my mother got sick. My mother, Carmen Knox, was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer in January last year. The news hit like a freight train, sudden and devastating. She was only 62, still working as a school librarian, still planning to travel after retirement. The cancer changed everything overnight. Suddenly there were doctor appointments, chemotherapy sessions, sleepless nights when the pain got too bad. Mom tried to stay independent, insisting she could handle everything alone, but I could see her getting smaller and weaker. I became her anchor, just like she'd been mine growing up. I drove her to treatments, organized her medications, stayed overnight when she was scared. I cooked her favorite meals when she could barely keep food down. I held her hand through the worst parts and celebrated the small victories. Caring for her felt natural, necessary, like breathing. She'd given me everything, and now it was my turn. I thought Valerie understood this. I thought she supported my decision to step up for the woman who raised me. I was wrong. Someone was keeping score, measuring my attention, feeling neglected while I was trying to save my mother's life. Someone always resented that bond, that unbreakable connection between a son and the woman who gave him everything. The first time Valerie called my caregiving excessive, I thought she was joking. This was 3 months after Mom's diagnosis, and I'd been spending most weekends at her house, helping with household tasks she couldn't manage anymore. You know, some people might call that excessive, Valerie said, laughing as she watched me pack another care package. Your mother's got nurses for a reason. I laughed too, thinking it was just her way of expressing concern. But then she started making little comments about being second place to my mother. She'd roll her eyes when I got calls during dinner, sigh dramatically when I canceled date plans for treatment appointments. I'm starting to feel like I married both of you, she'd say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. At first, I tried to explain that this was temporary, that Mom needed me right now. I thought Valerie would understand that love isn't a competition, that caring for my dying mother didn't mean I loved my wife less. But her jokes got sharper, more pointed. She started timing my visits, commenting on how many hours I spent at Mom's house versus home with her. The jokes were turning into truths, and I was too stressed to see the warning signs. Valerie's emotional withdrawal started small, almost imperceptible. She stopped asking about Mom's treatment progress, stopped sending little care packages like she used to. When I'd come home exhausted from a chemo session, she'd be watching TV with her back to me, offering only a distracted "hey" as greeting. She missed 3 important doctor appointments, each time claiming work emergencies I couldn't verify. During Mom's worst week, when the chemo made her so sick she couldn't keep water down, I called Valerie crying, needing support. She listened for maybe 2 minutes before saying, "I know this is hard, but you can't fall apart every time she has a bad day." The eye rolls started then, whenever I got emotional about Mom's condition. If I cried, she'd look irritated, like my grief was inconvenient. When I tried to share small victories, Mom keeping food down, good test results, better pain days, Valerie would nod without really listening. I found myself apologizing for grieving, for being stressed, for needing comfort. I'd say sorry after every difficult conversation, sorry for bringing sadness into our perfect life. I didn't realize then that I was apologizing for being human, for loving my mother enough to fight for her life until the very end. The comparison started in month 6 of Mom's illness. Valerie would mention friends whose marriages were stronger because they didn't let family drama interfere. "Look at Stephanie and Mike," she'd say. "His dad had surgery, but they didn't let it take over their whole relationship." She'd point out couples who traveled together, who focused on their own lives instead of getting dragged down by family obligations. According to Valerie, I was the problem for putting my dying mother's needs above our marriage convenience. She'd mention articles she'd read about setting boundaries with aging parents, about protecting your marriage from family interference. "Some people know how to prioritize," she'd say, watching me cancel another weekend trip to stay with Mom during a bad week. I started questioning myself, wondering if I was wrong to care so deeply. Maybe other people were better at compartmentalizing, at loving selectively. Maybe I was failing as a husband by being a good son. Valerie made it clear that successful couples didn't let family illness ruin their happiness. I was already losing ground in a battle I didn't know we were fighting, a competition between my mother's life and my wife's comfort. According to Valerie's scoreboard, I was choosing wrong every single time. The night I overheard her phone conversation was the night everything shifted. Mom had been readmitted to the hospital with an infection, and I was staying late to be with her. I came home around 10, emotionally drained, hoping for some comfort from my wife. I heard Valerie's voice from the kitchen, low and urgent. "I can't do this much longer, Nina. I feel completely trapped by his mother's illness. It's like Michael's forgotten he has a wife. My blood turned cold. I stood in the hallway, frozen, listening to her describe our marriage like a prison. He's always exhausted, always stressed, always putting his mother first. I didn't sign up to be second choice to a dying woman. The word trapped hit me like a physical blow. Trapped by my pain, by my mother's cancer, by my love for the woman who raised me. She continued, I've tried to be supportive, but there's only so much a person can take. Some situations are just impossible. She was talking about me like I was the disease, that like my grief was the problem that needed solving. When she hung up and saw me standing there, she didn't apologize, didn't try to explain. She just shrugged and said, You weren't supposed to hear that. Like the problem was my eavesdropping, not her complete lack of empathy for the man she claimed to love. The caregiver burnout was real, crushing, overwhelming. I was teaching full-time, managing Mom's medical schedule, handling her finances, coordinating with doctors, and trying to maintain some semblance of a marriage. I lost 15 pounds from stress and forgetting to eat. My hair started thinning. I'd fall asleep sitting up in hospital chairs, wake up with neck cramps and back pain. Some nights I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, mind racing through tomorrow's tasks. Pick up prescriptions, call the insurance company, grade papers, check on Mom's test results. I was drowning, disappearing under the weight of responsibility and love. When I finally broke down and asked Valerie for help, really asked, she responded like I'd requested something unreasonable. I work 60 hours a week, Michael. I can't be your backup caregiver too. I wasn't asking her to be a caregiver. I was asking for emotional support, for understanding, for basic human compassion. Instead, she sighed like I was asking too much. Like supporting your spouse through the hardest time of their life was an unreasonable burden. That's when I realized I was carrying everything alone. Mom's illness, my grief, our marriage, my job, everything. And my wife saw my struggle not as something to share, but as something that inconvenienced her perfectly planned life. The argument that changed everything happened 5 days before Mom died. We were in our kitchen, and I was packing another overnight bag because Mom's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Valerie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing that expression I'd come to dread. You're not fun anymore, she said, the words sharp and final. You used to be happy, spontaneous, interesting. Now you're just this. She gestured at me like I was something distasteful. I stopped packing and turned to face her. My mother is dying, Valerie. Of course I'm not fun right now. She shook her head. It's been over a year, Michael. You've let this consume you completely. You're not the person I married. The cruelty of those words took my breath away. The person she married was someone who'd never had to watch their mother suffer, never had to make impossible decisions about pain medication and feeding tubes. I'm sorry my grief is so inconvenient for you, I said, my voice shaking with anger I'd been holding back for months. Maybe when your mother is dying, you'll understand. Her response chilled me to the bone. When my mother dies, I'll handle it better. I won't let it destroy my marriage. I didn't recognize her voice, cold and calculating. This wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman who'd cried watching romantic movies. This was someone else entirely, someone who saw love as conditional and grief as a choice. Mom's final night was a Tuesday in March. The hospice nurse called at 11 p.m. to say she was failing fast, that I should come now if I wanted to say goodbye. I called Valerie from the car sobbing, telling her this was it. I'm going to the hospital, Mom's dying. Can you come? There was a pause, then her voice flat and tired. Michael, I have an early meeting tomorrow. I can't spend all night at the hospital. I stared at the phone, unable to process what I'd just heard. My mother was dying, and my wife was worried about a morning meeting. She's dying, Val. Tonight. Right now. Another pause. I know, and I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do to change that. You need to accept that this is happening and deal with it. Deal with it. Like my mother's death was a scheduling conflict to manage. I hung up without saying goodbye and drove to the hospital alone. Mom passed at 3:17 a.m., holding my hand, whispering that she loved me and was proud of the man I'd become. I called Valerie to tell her, and she answered on the 5th ring, voice groggy with sleep. Oh, okay, are you coming home now? That's when the distance between us became permanent, final, unbridgeable. She didn't come to the hospital. She didn't hold me while I cried. She treated my mother's death like an interruption to her sleep schedule. The woman I married would have been there. This stranger was someone else entirely. Let me tell you exactly what happened at the funeral, word for word, because those moments are burned into my memory forever. We were standing side by side during Father Rodriguez's reading from Psalms, surrounded by everyone who loved my mother. The chapel was full. Mom's friends from the library, my students, neighbors, family from out of state. Valerie was wearing her black dress, the one she bought for work events, standing perfectly composed while I struggled to breathe through my grief. That's when she leaned close, her lips almost touching my ear, and whispered, "I'm leaving you, Michael. Today. I can't pretend to be the supportive wife anymore. I've already packed my things." My whole body went cold. I turned to look at her, and she was staring straight ahead like she'd just commented on the weather. "You're doing this now?" I whispered back, my voice cracking. "At my mother's funeral?" She finally looked at me, eyes flat and empty. "There's never going to be a good time. Your grief will just find new reasons to drag on forever." That's when I said it, loud enough that the people around us could hear. "You waited until she died to abandon me." The words cut through Father Rodriguez's reading like a blade. The silence that followed was absolute, crushing, louder than any scream. She wanted control over the moment, the narrative, the timing, but she didn't expect me to call it what it was: abandonment. That night, Valerie left. No dramatic fight, no door slamming, no final confrontation. I came home from the burial to find her things gone. Clothes, books, the coffee maker she'd insisted we needed, even the throw pillows from our couch. She'd been methodical, surgical in her removal of herself from our life. The house felt hollow, echoing with absence. She left a note on the kitchen counter, typed and printed like a business memo. "Michael, I think we both know this hasn't been working for months. I need space to figure out what I want. I'll be staying with Nina for now. We can discuss the details later. Valerie." No apology for the timing, no acknowledgement of what she'd just put me through. Just cold, clinical detachment. I sat in our living room, surrounded by sympathy flowers from the funeral, staring at the empty spaces where her things used to be. The grief was layered now, complex, mourning my mother while processing the destruction of my marriage. I'd lost my anchor and my partner in the same day, left completely alone to navigate a world that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. That night, I didn't cry. I was beyond tears, existing in some numb space between disbelief and acceptance. Grief was stacking on grief, and I wasn't sure which loss hurt more. Within a week, Valerie had rewritten our entire story. According to her version, told to anyone who'd listen, she'd been the long-suffering wife who had no choice but to leave. She told people I'd pushed her away, become obsessed with my mother's illness, shut her out completely. "I tried everything," she told our mutual friend Karen, "but Michael made it clear I came second to his mother. I couldn't compete with a dead woman." The cruelty of that phrase, "compete with a dead woman," spread through our social circle like poison. She painted herself as the victim of my grief, the abandoned wife who'd been replaced by family obligation. She conveniently forgot the months of support she'd refused to give, the eye rolls, the complaints about my excessive caregiving. In her version, I was the selfish son who destroyed our marriage for a dying mother. She told people she'd begged me to set boundaries, to prioritize our relationship, to get professional help for my unhealthy attachment. Every word was carefully chosen to make her the reasonable one, the woman who'd tried to save a marriage from a spouse who wouldn't cooperate. Now she was the victim, and I was the problem that forced her hand. The narrative was spreading, taking root, becoming the accepted truth about why our marriage ended. 2 weeks after the funeral, I discovered just how calculated her exit had been. Going through our financial records, I found evidence that Valerie had been planning this for months. Bank statements showed she'd been slowly moving money to a new account in her name only, starting back in December. She'd consulted with a divorce attorney in February, while I was focused on Mom's deteriorating condition. Property records showed she'd already signed a lease on an apartment with Nina, dated 3 weeks before Mom died. This wasn't a desperate decision made in grief. This was a carefully orchestrated plan, executed with military precision. She'd used my mother's illness as cover, knowing I was too distracted to notice financial irregularities or secret meetings. While I was holding Mom's hand through chemo sessions, Valerie was meeting with lawyers, planning her escape route. She'd waited, watching my mother die, timing her announcement for maximum emotional impact. The funeral timing wasn't impulsive cruelty, it was strategic. She wanted me devastated, defenseless, unable to fight back or ask questions. She'd prepared for every contingency except one, that I'd eventually discover the cold calculation behind what looked like spontaneous abandonment. This level of planning, this methodical dismantling of our life while I grieved, revealed something about Valerie I'd never seen before. Something that chilled me to the bone. After discovering the extent of her planning, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I stopped chasing explanations. I stopped calling her, stopped asking our friends what she was saying about me, stopped defending myself against her carefully crafted narrative. The silence felt strange at first, like holding my breath underwater, but then it became something else, a shield, a boundary, a form of protection I'd never experienced before. When Karen called to get my side of the story, I simply said, "Valerie has made her choice clear. I have nothing to add." When my cousin James asked if I wanted him to confront her about the funeral incident, I said, "Let her live with what she's done. I'm done engaging." For months I'd been apologizing for my grief, explaining my choices, justifying my love for my mother. Now suddenly, I stopped. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for caring about my dying mother. I didn't need to defend choosing love over convenience. The people who mattered already understood. The people who didn't understand never would, no matter how many words I wasted trying to explain. Silence became my sanctuary, my power, my way of refusing to play a game I couldn't win. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Rebuilding while grieving is like learning to walk with broken legs. Painful, slow, but ultimately necessary. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Williams, who specialized in complicated grief. In our first session, I told her about the funeral, about losing my mother and my marriage in the same day. She listened without judgment, then said something that changed everything. Grief isn't just about death. You're also grieving the marriage you thought you had, the wife you thought Valerie was. For the first time, I was allowed to mourn properly. Not just for Mom, but for the relationship that had died long before Valerie announced it at the funeral. I learned that grief has its own timeline, that healing isn't linear, that some days I'd take 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. I started a grief support group where I met other people navigating loss without support systems. I took bereavement leave from work and actually rested instead of pretending to be fine. I planted a memorial garden in my backyard, choosing flowers Mom would have loved. Slowly, carefully, I began to stabilize. The raw pain didn't disappear, but it became manageable. I was learning to carry loss without being crushed by it, to honor my mother's memory without drowning in sorrow. Healing looked quiet, unremarkable from the outside, but it was the hardest work I'd ever done. 6 months after the funeral, I started hearing things. Karen mentioned that Valerie's new relationship was complicated. Nina let slip that Val was having trouble at work, missing deadlines, seeming distracted. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, saw her at the grocery store and said she looked worn down, not like herself. The confident, composed woman who'd walked away from our marriage was apparently struggling to maintain the image she'd built. People were asking questions she couldn't answer comfortably. Why had she left during a funeral? Why hadn't she tried marriage counseling? Why had she given up on 15 years so easily? The narrative she'd carefully constructed was developing cracks. Her story made her look reasonable on the surface, but when people thought about it longer, details didn't add up. Some of our mutual friends started reaching out to me, tentatively, as if testing whether I was ready to share my perspective. I wasn't ready to talk, but their calls suggested that Valerie's version of events wasn't aging well. People who knew us both, who'd watched our marriage from the beginning, were having trouble reconciling the Valerie they knew with the woman who'd abandoned her husband at his mother's funeral. Her carefully crafted narrative was unraveling, And she was discovering that controlling a story is harder than creating it. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when it's buried under layers of convenient lies. The message came on a Tuesday in September, 6 months and 2 weeks after the funeral. A text from Valerie sent at 2:47 a.m. I keep thinking about that day. About what I said and when I said it. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed you to know I'm sorry about the timing. I stared at the message for a long time, noting what it said and what it didn't say. Sorry about the timing. Not sorry for leaving. Not sorry for the months of emotional abandonment. Not sorry for planning her exit while my mother was dying. Just sorry about the timing. Like she'd scheduled a dentist appointment during lunch, instead of destroying her grieving husband at his mother's funeral. The message felt calculated, careful, designed to open a door without accepting full responsibility. 3 days later, another text. I've been thinking about us a lot lately. About what went wrong. Maybe we could talk sometime. I think I understand some things now that I didn't before. She wanted something. I could feel it in the careful phrasing, the tentative tone, the way she was testing the waters. This wasn't about genuine remorse or closure. This was about her needs, her timeline, her desire to manage the narrative one more time. After months of silence, she was reaching out because something in her new life wasn't working. The woman who'd had everything planned, who'd executed her exit with such precision, was apparently discovering that walking away had consequences she hadn't anticipated. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, where neither of us had memories. Valerie arrived first, sitting in a corner booth, wearing the navy blouse I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. She looked smaller than I remembered, less certain, like confidence was something she'd misplaced and couldn't find again. When she saw me, she smiled tentatively, the kind of smile you give someone whose reaction you can't predict. I sat across from her, folded my hands on the table, and waited. You look good, she said, which was a lie. I looked tired, older, marked by loss in ways that would never fully fade. Thank you for meeting me. I nodded, but didn't speak. The silence stretched between us, and I watched her fidget with her coffee cup, searching for words. I've been thinking about that day, about what I said at the funeral. She paused, waiting for me to respond, to make this easier for her. I didn't. The timing was terrible. I know that now. You were grieving, and I made everything worse. She was trying to justify the moment, to explain it away as poor judgment rather than calculated cruelty. I let her talk, watching her construct explanations that would minimize her responsibility while acknowledging just enough fault to seem reasonable. Every word she spoke told me she still didn't understand what she'd done, still saw herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of our destruction. As Valerie continued talking, the truth finally emerged, piece by careful piece. She admitted she'd been thinking about leaving for months before Mom died. She'd consulted with a lawyer just to understand her options. She'd looked at apartments just to see what was available. Each revelation was presented as innocent preparation, reasonable precaution, sensible planning. But as the details accumulated, a different picture formed. She'd been planning our divorce while holding my hand at Mom's chemotherapy sessions. She'd been meeting with attorneys while I sobbed in her arms about Mom's pain. She'd been apartment hunting while I begged her to support me through the hardest time of my life. I waited because I thought it would be easier after. She said, the words hanging in the air like poison. I thought once your mother passed, you'd be able to focus on us again. The cruelty of that calculation took my breath away. She'd waited for my mother to die, watched me grieve, then chosen the funeral as her exit moment, because she thought I'd be too devastated to fight back. She'd used my love for my mother against me, turning my grief into a weapon for her own convenience. This wasn't poor timing or bad judgment. This was intentional, calculated, designed to cause maximum damage when I was least able to defend myself. The woman sitting across from me wasn't seeking forgiveness. She was trying to justify the unjustifiable. When Valerie finished her explanations, she sat back and waited for my response. I could see her expecting anger, tears, accusations, the kind of emotional reaction she could deflect or counter. Instead, I looked her in the eye and spoke calmly, quietly, with the clarity that comes from months of therapy and self-reflection. You planned to abandon me while my mother was dying. You used my grief as cover for your escape plan. And you chose her funeral as your announcement because you thought I'd be too broken to see clearly. She started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. You wanted me devastated, defenseless, unable to ask questions or fight back. You calculated that my love for her would make me vulnerable to your cruelty. My voice stayed steady, matter of fact, like I was teaching a history lesson. What you didn't calculate was that your actions would reveal exactly who you are. Not the woman I married, not the partner I thought I knew, but someone capable of weaponizing grief against the person she claimed to love. She had no defense, no counter-argument, no explanation that could transform calculated abandonment into accidental insensitivity. For the first time since I'd known her, Valerie had nothing to say. She sat in silence, finally understanding that some actions can't be justified, explained away, or forgiven. The woman who'd always had perfect words for every situation had finally encountered a truth that left her speechless. The months after our coffee shop meeting revealed the full scope of Valerie's fall from grace. The confident narrative she'd constructed began collapsing as people learned the real timeline of her departure. When Karen discovered that Valerie had been planning her exit while I was caring for my dying mother, she stopped returning Valerie's calls. Other friends followed suit, quietly but definitively. The law firm where she worked started questioning her judgment after someone mentioned the funeral incident at a professional gathering. How could they trust someone who'd abandoned their spouse at a funeral to handle sensitive client matters? Her relationship with the coworker she'd started dating immediately after leaving me imploded when he learned she'd been planning their affair while still married to a grieving man. Even Nina, her closest friend who'd provided the post-divorce apartment, began keeping distance after neighbors in their building commented on Valerie's reputation problem. The social consequences she'd never anticipated were arriving like bills she'd forgotten to pay. Her image as the reasonable, mature woman who'd simply grown apart from her husband was replaced by whispers about funeral cruelty and calculated abandonment. The control she'd maintained over our story evaporated as the truth spread through our community. People weren't just questioning her version of events anymore. They were questioning her character, her values, her fitness as a friend and professional. The woman who'd engineered her perfect exit was discovering that some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. Today, I stand in my kitchen making coffee, surrounded by the life I've built from the ashes of loss and betrayal. The house is quiet but not empty. It's filled with my mother's memory, with photos and plants, and the peace that comes from choosing yourself fully. I've learned to carry grief without being crushed by it, to honor love without sacrificing self-respect. The garden outside my window blooms with flowers Mom would have loved, tended by hands that have learned to nurture healing instead of chasing approval. I teach my students about resilience through historical examples, but I understand it now in ways I never did before. Resilience isn't about avoiding pain. It's about walking through it with dignity, refusing to let cruelty define your worth. Valerie's texts stopped coming months ago, her attempts to rewrite history finally abandoned when she realized I wouldn't help her edit the truth. The woman who thought she could time her cruelty perfectly, who calculated that my love for my mother would make me weak, discovered something she never expected. That the same love that made me vulnerable also made me unbreakable. The silence after my reply at the funeral wasn't weakness. It was the sound of strength being born. I honored my mother's memory by refusing to let her death be weaponized against me. I protected her legacy by showing that love, real love, doesn't abandon people when they need it most.